Music therapy is a way to use music to help people with addictions and diseases. Our next guest studies how music can have both positive and negative influences. Music therapist Andrew Knight is here to talk about what he found. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Katie.
Now, you're a music therapist by trade, and you have also started studying music and how it affects drinking and drug use. Why do you have an interest in these areas?
Well, a lot of what music therapy is really trying to use music to help somebody, and it could be people with a variety of special needs. One of the particular interests with addiction started with understanding a little bit more about addictions when I had a family member, an uncle, that passed away from alcoholism when I was younger. My cousin, who was his son, just spent a lot of time playing guitar to himself, and I was a drummer, and so we would get together and we'd, I think a lot of people recognize that music helps them get through tough times, but it's there for, jubilant times as well. And in general, I think we all understand that we all have a personal connection to music. So for addictions specifically, there's a lot of different ways that music can help people through things. And I think a lot of people can identify with artists who have used music, and they put it in the lyrics that they're using, or some of the different ways that they're, if it's instrumental music too, they could be transmitting some emotions that maybe can't be said with words.
And from this research that you've been doing, you've created this lecture entitled Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, Music Therapy and the Super Stimulus. What is the message with this lecture?
Well, the message about the super stimulus is that music is a really significant thing that changes, it functionally changes the way that our brains are wired. We call that a matter of neuroplasticity, the idea that the neurons in your brain have some plasticity that can change. But also other things that cause significant changes, sexual, emotion, sexual intimacy, drug use certainly, and music. And so I make the point that although all three of those things are really significant potential changers of the way that your brain operates, they also have side effects, but the side effects of music are very different than side effects from something like sex or drugs.
Okay. And what are the components of the research that you've conducted?
Well, some of the research that exists is more quantitative. So there's metrics about, very specific, like brain scans and those sorts of things, imagery of showing, wow, these are the brain parts that are actually changing when people are listening to music. It's the same thing. These are the brain parts that are changing during sexual arousal. Here are the brain parts that are changing, when somebody is addicted or when somebody is actually, intoxicated versus sober. And when you compare all those different brain parts, you sort of start going, wow, there's a lot in common here. And so I think when you start realizing how much in common those three different parts have, it was a matter of looking at a different aspect. So I was looking at more of a qualitative angle. And with qualitative angle, it's more understanding a phenomenon. So it was really difficult to do a lot more interviews, observations, and so that's what I did. I ended up interviewing several different people, including DJs, people who have experienced life, going to music concerts, being musicians themselves, going to clubs, and but also observing people who are at clubs and that sort of thing. So it's trying to understand a bigger phenomenon.
And earlier you were talking, about how these have effects on the brain, and we actually have a graphic that is kind of showing, the difference between sober and intoxicated person. Can you kind of explain what's going on here?
Yeah, when we have this new sort of neuroimaging technology, the idea that you can look and see what's happening into a brain real time, especially for the sober brain, for instance, you're seeing a lot different activation patterns than with the intoxicated brain. You almost see there's brain parts that are shut down, but it's very specific parts. And there's parts about how you're using your executive functioning, which is how you're making good judgments or bad judgments. And none of that is rocket science to anybody who understands the nature of alcohol, for instance, if we're just talking specifically about alcohol. But there is a certain aspect of what neuroscientists are starting to understand about how the brain works, what the effects of alcohol is on the brain specifically. But what's interesting to me as a music therapist is that there's a lot of neuroscientists and psychologists and cognitive scientists who are now also interested in what the brain looks like when music is happening, and what the commonality is these pleasure centers in the brain, usually with dopamine, which is one of these main sort of pleasure neurochemicals that's released when you do any of these three main things.
And okay, as a music therapist, you use music to help people move away from addictions. But with this, music is almost connected to the addiction in a negative aspect. Can you kind of explain this problem?
Yeah, that's how research really starts, right? There's some main problem that you can't get a good hold of. And so the main problem here was, well, if people are attached to music that they're listening to at a club, it's extremely loud. Usually the lyrics are encouraging more of explicit sexual behavior, or explicit drug use or alcohol use or something. And so if I'm going to use music as a way to help somebody have sort of a catharsis or express themselves emotionally, then I need to reconsider how I was using music. And I didn't really know how to do that, considering recorded music specifically. With live music and music therapy, we might do something like improvisation or songwriting or something. But with recorded music, it's a very different ballgame because they have associations. They've listened to this kind of music, and this is the stuff that they're pairing with those very intense experiences. That goes back to that super stimulus part.
Well, thank you, Andrew, so much for sharing your research with us on
You're
the
welcome.
show.